and welcome back to K&C Taxidermy. We're continuing on with this process with the Oryx that we've been doing. We took it out of tan and neutralized it in the baking soda solution, and then where we left off is we had set it out to dry, to drip dry a little bit. We don't want it dry, we just want it enough to where it's still kind of wet, damp, really damp, but not dripping water. As you can see, it's still pretty wet. You can still see it leaves a wet mark on my table, but yet it's not dripping water. It's wet enough to where I'm still able to work with it and do what I need to do with it. And I'm like I said, I do the wet tanning method, so I'll be able to, it's still pliable and I'll still be able to work with it really well while it's still wet, but you don't want it sopping wet. You just want it wet enough to where it's not dry and stiff, but not sopping, dripping wet either. And then what we're going to do, once we get it out and it's dry how we want it dry, then we're gonna turn the cape inside out, because now we're going to start the fleshing process. And as you're turning it out, you kind of want to inspect it. You'll see that, see, like here's a bullet hole where it was shot, obviously. So those are things you're going to want to make mental notes of, because after we flesh it, then we're going to be doing the sewing and any repairs of the cape or the ears, anything, or sometimes you get a tear from your fleshing wheel. It'll snag up and kind of make a little bit of a tear, but that's okay, because we're gonna, before you complete the fleshing part, and then you're gonna oil it, and before you put it on the mount, you'll have everything fixed up and sewn up, and it'll look brand new, and it'll be ready to go. So, but anyway, so just make sure as you're turning it out to get ready to flesh it, you're making any kind of inspecting it, making any kind of mental note to go back to look for any kind of, and see by the mouth here, there's kind of a little, probably while whoever was skinning it out, in this case at the hunting lodge, when they were skinning it out, it was, there's a little pop hole right there, probably from their knife when they were field dressing it. Yep, I'm just going to look it over real quick and see if there's any big holes, because I like to also try to avoid those on the wheel too. I'm just careful and mindful of them, because you don't want those to catch on your blade and make bigger tears than there already are. I just like to know where those areas are that are already weakened, and so I don't make them worse and then make more work for myself in sewing. I know a lot of taxidermists don't like to sew. I myself don't mind sewing. I like to rebuild briskets and stuff when people cut their capes too short. I don't mind patching those and fixing them. It's kind of a fun little puzzle for me. So it's stuff that I like to do, and some of this stuff you can go ahead and tear off yourself. Some of this stuff that's on here that's already come loose with the tanning, but the fleshing wheel is going to take all this off, but you can already go ahead and start removing it, some of the bigger stuff. But so anyways, I turn this inside out, and then we're going to start putting it on the wheel here in just a second. Okay, and then where I usually pick back up is once I get it turned out and I'm ready to turn on my wheel, my preference is to start down at the brisket end, at the wider end of the cape, and work my way up towards the head. So, and a lot of, like I said, I haven't been doing this very long, and I myself am still pretty new at fleshing and mounting and the whole process myself, but I just thought we could learn together. I have gotten better since school, just because I've done it so much, but I still a lot of people can really get in there and thin the lips out really well on the wheel and around the eyes and around the nose and get it really thin and do a really good job, and they're probably do it professionally. I don't know. I tend to get as close as I can, and then I like to thin those areas by hand just because I like to save myself the trouble of having to sew it back together, because I still usually get snagged up. So I'm just being honest, and I know there may be people out there that are going to say, she's not doing that right. And you're right, I'm probably not, but I'm just sharing my experience with you and letting you know letting you follow along with how I'm doing things and how I too am learning the process. So anyways, so I start down here, and this is usually where I tend to see the most fat, is especially on the chest part here on the brisket. There's usually, which most of it I trimmed off while I was, most of it's trimmed off when it's caped out, but there's still sometimes a little bit on your real fatty animals. There's sometimes a little bit left. Like I said, the fleshing wheel, if you leave your cape and tan in the crow tan, say, usually the instructions say like 2 or 3 days. I tend to leave, especially my bigger animals, in for a minimum of 2 weeks, okay? And even my big stuff like my bison or wildebeest or bear, I mean, I'm talking, I leave those in tan for like a month or 2, just because I want to make sure that tan really penetrates that hide. And I don't want any slippage. I don't want to take any chances of messing up, okay? Especially on my exotics, because it's not like I can just go out and get another cape or contact a friend and say, hey, you got a spare deer cape? You know, it's a lot easier to do that than call somebody and say, hey, you got a spare Oryx cape? Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Okay, so anyways, so I'm going to flip on my wheel here, and I'm going to show you just a minute of what it looks like to start fleshing. And fortunately, my wheel, it's not really super loud at all. I got this is a Van Dyke's, let me see, this is a Van Dyke's, and you can get that off of Van Dyke's Taxidermy.com. I'm not quite sure, I don't remember, my husband actually got this for me. I'm not sure specifically of the model, but they have all different kinds. My husband did make this table for me. Unfortunately, he made it to his height, so I still have to use a stool in order for me to use it, because like I've mentioned before, I'm a little on the shorter side. But anyways, so if you're wondering where I got this getup, the wheel itself and the motor, the fleshing wheel itself and the motor was ordered on Van Dyke's, and the table was handmade by my husband. There was a fold in it. You got to make sure you hold it completely flat, the surface, or if you snag it, you cut a hole in it like that, which is fine. It's a clean cut. I'll be able to sew it up. More than likely, that'll be cut out anyways because it's on the back of the brisket. It'll probably be folded over the form anyways, but that's what happens. That's what See how nice and clean that's getting, as opposed to this. Okay. Okay, now as I was fleshing, remember sometimes if you're kind of get working really fast, maybe faster than you should, and you're not keeping your flesh good and taut, and you get a fold in it and you snag that fold, sometimes this happens. Okay, you can get a little catch or snag, or if you're not keeping debris free from your wheels, stopping every once in a while and making sure stuff isn't getting flung up in there and caught, and something can catch. And anyways, there's all kinds of things. Or sometimes you just get a little heavy-handed and you scald it and you have to cut out a piece where the hair, where you kind of scalded it, and that hair will fall out if you cut it, if you flesh it too short in that spot. So you just want to go ahead and cut it out. So then you'll have like a football shape like this. Now usually it's better to go, for example, across. If you have, instead of cutting up and down, say this is the neck, instead of going this way and pulling it tighter and losing width on your neck, because then that's going to throw you off your form. Okay, this is something important to keep in mind when you're sewing. You don't want to take away from your width, the girth of your neck, the swell, if you will, because then that's going to make your form not fit. It's going to be too tight on your form, and then your form's not going to be right. So if you've already ordered your form. So what you want to do is you want to sew side to side, because you want to pull the top and the bottom together, because you have a whole lot more give from the bottom, because more than likely you're going to cut most of this off, the bottom of the brisket. So you want to use that. And that's not going to screw up your swell, your measurements on your neck, okay? So that's just something to keep in mind too. If you have to make any kind of repairs or cuts in your cape to repair, you're going to want to do it side to side, not up and down, because the up and down, pulling it this way, is going to, you're going to lose inches here, this way, whether you want to pull it this way, okay, so that you're pulling from the bottom up instead of from the side over. All right, trying to clarify that, because that's really important when you're sewing, especially if you've already ordered your form to your cape. All right, so next, about that hole, about sewing that. All you're pretty much going to do is, and we can show a little snippet of that later on, but what you're going to do is like a baseball stitch. You're pretty much, once you got down here, and this may not even matter, because once I put it on the form and look at it, once I test fit it, it's maybe a part that I cut off anyway. So usually the bottom of the brisket, which usually where most of your holes are anyways, because they're bullet holes. Bullet holes are usually in the shoulder area or sometimes in the neck, but usually they're lower down. So sometimes that pulls off your form anyway, so you may not even have to sew it. It might not even have to be an issue. The only ones you really need to focus on, especially if you're turning out your ears, we'll have to repair our ears. And if I usually go ahead and repair any kind of, or patch, and we'll talk about patches too. I usually go ahead and repair any kind of holes in my face and in my neck and in my ears before I put it on the form. And that way I can see if there's anything down here that's still showing, and because once that form starts drying, once the cape starts drying on the form, stuff tightens up, and you don't want those holes pulling apart and opening up, and then all of a sudden your deer or antelope or whatever has a bullet hole in it again. So we want to make sure that that's either pulled off the form or it's repaired correctly. Okay, well now after I've pretty much fleshed it for the most part, as you can see, I've debulked primarily the most of that meat that was on there. It looks a whole lot different. You'll get a nice white flesh look. Some of this is the dark staining, especially by your bullet holes, is staining from the blood, but for the most part, and especially this has been in the freezer for a long time. If you have any kind of freezer burn or sometimes you'll have some staining. But for the most part, there's still some things I can go over it some more and get off some more. But just for a quick version, this is pretty much what it's going to look like after you flesh it for the most part. It's going to be just your skin left. You're going to get all that fat and meat off, and you're going to have a nice skin. Now, all this, now your nose, we haven't done the thinning of the lips and nose and eyes and the turning out of the ears and all that. But we will, but after you flesh, you don't need all this for tucking. So I start, I always trim a little bit of, I do this by hand. I just, because I'm not going to need all this. So I go ahead and start cleaning this up some. Those hard cartilage parts and stuff like that. Because you're not going to need all of this for the tucking of your nose into your form. So you still want to leave your nice little pocket for your nose. Remember, this is inside out, so this is going to be inside the form. But I'm going to go ahead, I usually debulk this by hand, just because, like I said, I'm still learning myself, and I like to do a lot of things hands-on because I can feel it better, and just I work better with my hands, like actually being able to feel it. And see, there's a piece of cartilage right there, and that's not going to tuck easily, so I'm going to cut that out. And so I want nice thin, loose skin, and I'll thin this out a little bit more once I get it all debulked. And you can do that on your wheel, or you can do it by hand. I can go around and just kind of, you know, do that by hand. Trim it up a little bit, trim some of that stuff off. Like I said, you can either do it by hand or with your wheel if you're really good and feel really comfortable with doing all this stuff with your wheel. But see, that's how you just clean up that nostril, and that's your skin that you're going to tuck into the form. And of course, we'll show that later on once we get into that process with putting it on the form. Thank you for watching us here at K&C Taxidermy. Remember to like and subscribe us here on YouTube, and join us next time for our latest creation. And we'll see you then.